I had a wildly traumatic birth when our daughter Sawyer was born, like over 25 years ago.
Mhm.
Just forceps, vacuum delivery, then the placenta tore. I had to have a manual extraction and like lost all this blood. And I didn't realize it at the time, but all of that trauma to the birth canal basically just shredded all the muscles in that region. And from that point forward, I started having chronic issues with leaking urine. Like
Mhm.
I would take a step and I would leak. I would sneeze, I would leak. Forget about jumping on a trampoline, forget about jumping rope. Like it started to profoundly impair the quality of my life. I just thought there was this wildly embarrassing thing that was happening to me that made me not want to go on a big hike, that made me stop running, something that I really love doing because I would literally soak my shorts by
Yeah.
the time I was done running a mile. And so, this is something that I lived with for a long time, and I was really scared to do any kind of surgery around it, which I ultimately did. But, I tried to strengthen the pelvic floor, but my case was so far gone after having 3 kids and letting it go for so long. Like I had so much shame around it, Dr. Rena, that I didn't even talk to anybody around it. I got
Yeah.
pregnant again, had another baby. It got worse. I just started wearing maxi pads. Like it was a constant thing. And then finally, I'm like, this is interfering with the quality of my life. And I might have been able to do something had I had the courage to talk to a doctor like you right after Sawyer's birth to try to strengthen the pelvic floor. What other role does your pelvic floor play in your overall well-being and health?
Yeah, I mean, so it's sort of like an under recognized important structure in your body, right? So people, I always give it the example of like people who get TMJ, right? You never think about these muscles here until you're grinding your teeth at night or you're causing problems, you're waking up with headaches because you're having TMJ. It's the same thing. Your pelvic floor is really important. It does a lot of things. And if it's functioning normally, you never need to think about it. It's doing all it needs to do. You're feeling fine. Everything's great. Good. That's wonderful. And I really want to thank you for sharing your story because it is so common. This is what I trained in female pelvic medicine.
Oh, you did?
That's what I did my fellowship in. Yeah.
Wow.
And I can't tell you the number of women who wait years. Like you ask them, how long have you had this for? 20 years, 40 years? Like no joke. They've been living with leakage or prolapse or overactive bladder, which I know we're going to talk about, for years. And they've been so busy taking care of their kids, their partner, their parents, anyone who needs them but themselves. And so I hope whoever is listening, I hope if you're listening that you're having these troubles, that you can take the courage it takes to go to the doctor and talk about this. Because one, you might save yourself a surgery, but two, you're prioritizing yourself. And I always tell people, like, take care of yourself because you are worth it. And like, you need to do that. And I'm glad you did it. I wish you had done it earlier, but this story is going to help millions of people. Like, they are sitting at home struggling with the same thing, crying about their diapers, right? Like, oh my God, I have to wear adult diapers. I can't believe this. I'm 40 years old or I'm 30 years old. I just had a baby. Like, it is extremely devastating. And we just like, oh, everyone leaks a little. Like we just sort of brush it off like it's nothing.
I wish I had addressed this at least a decade before I did, if not even a decade and a half. And so the thing that I really want you to hear, whether you are younger and this is happening, or that you have had kids and this is happening, or you're older and you've been living with it, is that there's actually a lot that you can do about this. What I would love to talk about is, could you just list off the symptoms that you may be dealing with a pelvic floor issue?
So let's start with urine. Urinary urgency, gotta go, gotta go. Urinary frequency, going more often than usual. Urinary leakage. So that can be leakage that occurs because you cough, sneeze, do heavy things, do any exercise. That's called stress incontinence. And then there's leakage that occurs because you gotta go, can't make it. And that's urge incontinence. They're different processes and they have different treatment options. Just, we can talk more about that if you want. And then, there's leakage that you just don't know. And that could be both. And also, as I mentioned, difficulty emptying your bladder. So if you're having difficulty emptying your bladder, or if you're having pain with urination and you've ruled out a urinary tract infection. So those are the common urinary complaints. Pelvic floor pain related complaints can be just feeling pain in the pelvic floor. So like you feel pain in the vagina, pain with sex, pain with orgasm, can be pain in the hips or backs that might be correlated with it. You can then, for bowel symptoms, you can have constipation. So if you're having difficulty emptying, it could be a fact that your sphincter or your muscles around the sphincter are not relaxing. And so you're having difficulty emptying or evacuating your colon. And so those are probably the most common symptoms. And I would just say, if you're having any of those, it's valuable if you're bothered particularly, or if you're having pain, to see a doctor, urologist, a pelvic surgeon, a female pelvic surgery expert, a urogynecologist, anyone that is available to you.
I know it sounds like a dumb question because I hear urogynecologist or urologist and I'm like, oh, that's a pee-pee doctor. I don't think about, we go there and we talk to them about constipation, but I could see how, as we're learning that the pelvic floor and your pelvic floor health has way more function and importance, from everything from normal bladder function to normal elimination function to orgasm to the overall health of that region of your body. It makes a lot of sense. How many people have pelvic floor issues?
I mean, I don't think we have an accurate number because I think many are underdiagnosed, but we know that up to 40% of women will have some prolapse. Very few of them will need anything for it. We know that up to a third of women will have urinary leakage. So it's very, very common. And to your point about, should a urologist or urogynecologist be able to talk to you about these things? A good urogynecologist or urologist with female urology training will talk to you not only about your urinary symptoms, but about your constipation, about your neurologic symptoms. Because I mentioned sometimes it can be neurologic in nature.
What do you mean?
So maybe you had a back injury and maybe you injured something in your spine that could be causing issues. So they'll talk to you about that. They'll talk to you about your sexual function. So you should be having a really holistic approach in terms of all these things can contribute. So a lot of people don't know that constipation can cause urinary problems just in and of itself. So if you're just constipated, you might find yourself going more often to the bathroom. You might find yourself going more frequently, going urgently, or waking up at night because it's all full of stool and it's pushing against the bladder. Sometimes people will be more likely to get urinary tract infections if they're constipated. So these are things that are very interconnected, which is why we always talk about them.
I'm just curious, why is there so much shame around having a leaky bladder?
Well, I think it just feels very degrading to people. You feel like you're not in control of your bodily functions, and it's like wearing a diaper, smelling like urine. It is very, very debilitating for people, to the point where they stop going out in public. They stop seeing their friends. They stop going to movies because they can't sit through the movie without having a leak, or they stop doing things they love because they're so embarrassed by it. And it's one thing, if you're not embarrassed, great. But I think the majority of people really fall into that category. And once we're there, it's not just the implications of, oh, you're leaking. It's the implications of, okay, now you're not having social connection. Now you're depressed. Now you're not productive in life. Now, it's very multifactorial, the impact of incontinence, and why we just throw it away like it's nothing. It's really an important problem. And I'm sorry, but for a lot of people, pads are just, that's not an answer they want to live with. But for some people, that is, and that's fine. But pads are also really expensive. So for a lot of people, spending money every month on pads is an exorbitant expense. And so I think you don't need to suffer in silence. You don't need to suffer in shame. We are here to help you. I love taking care of patients who have these issues because I can change their life. They are dramatically happier after they see me, right? And sometimes it takes a little work, right? If we're going to try medications or try some things, the first thing may not work, and that's okay. We're on a journey together to get you better.
Awesome. Okay, so what is the pelvic floor?
Yeah, so the pelvic floor is actually part of your core. So people don't realize this. They think of core, they think of abdominal muscles, but it's actually a bowl of muscles that sits in the pelvis that holds up your organs. So holds up your bladder, holds up your uterus for women, holds up your rectum, and it also attaches to different parts on our bones. So it attaches to the coccyx, which is like the end of the spine. It attaches to the hips and to the pelvic bones. And so these areas are all interconnected, and it's a very important group of muscles, and it does a lot of different things for us. So it does things like control our sphincters, right? So when you want to urinate, your sphincter is holding until you're ready and at the bathroom, and it relaxes and allows urination to come out. Similarly with your bowels, your sphincter is contracted until you're ready to defecate or have a bowel movement, and then it opens and you have stool come out, right? And so that's part of it. It's also part of supporting your organs. So for women, very often you'll see women can develop something called prolapse, where they may have a vaginal hernia, and that's usually because of a weakness of the pelvic floor. So it's important for supporting these organs. It's important for stability. So every time you take a step, you're actually activating your pelvic floor. So it helps us with stability. And it also helps us with sexual function. When you have an orgasm, those muscles contract and squeeze, and that's sort of what gives you that part of the sensation of an orgasm. And then it's also a sump pump. So it helps with lymphatic fluid and clearing our lymphatic fluids and pushing it up to our heart and clearing that through our bodies.
What is the pelvic floor? You said this is a very important part of your anatomy that we don't talk about enough, that has an impact on everything from normal urinary function, normal like pooping, your orgasm, all of it. Like, is it like a hammock down there?